Welcome to Home Cooked Stories, the podcast that brings flavor and inspiration to your ears. I'm your host, Julia Darling, a working mother with a family of 5 to feed and an insatiable appetite for all things food. Inspired by the life lessons from my mom, I believe food has profound links to our lives, from family recipes that leave a legacy, to the culinary journeys that define our travels, and the food that shapes our culture and lifestyle. Join me on this audio adventure as we dig into delicious topics, bringing more meaning and connectivity to our lives. And yes, we'll definitely work up an appetite. Remember, food isn't just what's on your plate. It helps tell the story of who you are. So wherever you are in this moment, pull up a seat and tune in, because life's too short for bland stories and boring meals. Welcome to Home Cooked Stories. Hello, everybody. My name is Julia Darling, your host, and welcome to the very first episode of the Home Cooked Stories podcast. I am so excited that you are here today. We are getting back to basics and getting back into the kitchen with home-cooked meals. But tell me if this scenario sounds familiar to you, because it certainly happens to me multiple times a week in my life. You know, I work from home, so I'm wrapping up that last Zoom call of the day. Perhaps I am checking email, checking off my to-do list. It is the witching hour. The kids are coming in. They are tired. They are hungry. They want to know what's for dinner. And I look up, it's 6 o'clock, and I haven't even started preparing the meal that I had every intention of cooking and even bought the groceries for. So what do? I pivot and decide we're going to take out or we're going to go out to eat, because quite honestly, in those moments, making a meal is just one more obligation or stressor at the end of the day. So how do we do it? How can we start making little shifts in our mindset or in our habits to keep the momentum of home-cooked meals alive? And I am thrilled to have my BFF, one of my best food friends, Sheela Prakash, with me today. And we are on a mission to help you feel, hopefully by the end of this episode, inspired and empowered to make home-cooked meals more convenient, more effortless, and more often. Sheela is a recipe developer and food and wine writer. Her recipes have been featured in New York Times Cooking, and she was previously on staff at Kitchen, Epicurious, and Food 52. She is also the author of 2 cookbooks. I have both of them, highly recommend them, and have linked them for you in the show notes below. The first is called Mediterranean Every Day, Simple Inspired Recipes for Feel-Good Food. And her second cookbook, Salad Seasons, Vegetable Forward Dishes All Year, received numerous accolades, including Wired, Fortune, Bon Appetit, the San Francisco Chronicle, and Food Network, all praising it as one of the best cookbooks of 2023. But on a personal note, I have to attest, Sheela is one of the most kind-hearted individuals I know, and her recipes and cookbooks are truly a reflection of the type of person that she is and the values that she puts behind food. So without further ado, Sheela Prakash, welcome to the very first episode of Home Cooked Stories.
Hi, Julia. Thanks so much for having me.
I'm so
exciting.
I know. It just, I have to start off by just telling you how truly grateful I am that not just today taking the time, but from the very beginning when I came to you with this idea of, hey, I'm going to start a podcast and would you want to be a guest? You were just so supportive and willing and wanting to dedicate, some time and effort to it. So thank you.
Oh, absolutely. It came full circle. It's fun.
It really did. From the very beginning, it came full circle.
Absolutely.
When I was looking at, all that you've accomplished from your studies on into your professional career, have always had this focus and love for food. And so I'm just curious, is there a particular person or place or moment in your life that kind of sparked that for you?
Yeah, I can't place it on one specific moment or person or place, but it's always been something I've been curious about. I think particularly in my teenage years, I kind of grew up in the Food Network era, if you remember it well, and I remember we got cable like not until I was in high school, and suddenly there was this thing called the Food Network, and it was starting to make people curious about food. And it was entertaining to boot. And so I think that it's kind of strange to say that that was one of the sparks. And there were always like food magazines lying around my house. I feel like those also were really popular at the time. And I remember my dad would subscribe to Food and Wine magazine, and I would come home from school, and instead of doing homework, I would just spend too many hours flipping through them. It just sort of sparked this thought in my mind of like, wow, like this, people do this for a living. Like people write about food. I always liked writing, and people like, create these recipes, people play around. I always liked science too. So there was this kind of overlap between two things that don't often overlap, writing creatively and science. And so that sort of sparked it. And then I just kind of kept exploring that.
I love that. And I love what you were talking about. My mom was the one that would have, Bon Appetit magazines and Food and Wine and Southern Living. In fact, I have an old, I say it's a recipe book, but it's a notebook where she's got clear sheet protectors, and she would do clippings and has notebooks full of recipes that she would tear out of magazines. And those would become kind of her go-to cookbooks. I too was a huge Food Network fan. When I started working remote, like before kids, Stuart would go into the office. It would just be me. It's a little too quiet in the house. There's no kind of commotion or just chatter. So that's what I would turn on as background noise. But I feel like a little bit of an old lady, Sheela, and that I still love holding a cookbook or holding a food magazine or even a newspaper. And I'm curious, given your perspective of being in the food industry, and particularly when it comes to food writing and recipe developing and writing cookbooks, give us like a little peek behind the curtain of how Americans are shifting how we consume food media and how we go and seek inspiration or resources when it comes to cooking. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's kind of wild because I feel like I really kind of was part of that shift. Like I remember even when I was getting my first job in food or internship in food when I was in college, I wanted the magazine job. I remember like handwriting letters to the editor-in-chief at Food and Wine because I was like, I'm in New York. I want that role. Like I've been reading the magazine, and it was fading out already at that time. All of the magazines were starting to move to digital. And so I never actually got the dream magazine job where you're writing for print. I kind of immediately transitioned into digital because that's what was happening. And soon after that, it was, okay, now we have a website that we have recipes on, but now all these people are on social media. So we need to have a presence on Facebook, and Twitter and Pinterest was popular at the time.
Yes.
And so it's been really, really interesting because every step of my career has been this constant shift of how are people consuming recipes? How are they consuming inspiration for food and cooking? And it's still changing.
Yes.
It's reaching a point where I too feel old now, where I can't keep up with it. And I'm starting to just, not really be sure of the future. At the end of the day, though, I think no matter where you're getting your kind of content, your recipes, or inspiration from, everybody really is just looking for simple. They're looking for meals that will feed themselves and their family without making a giant mess, without buying a whole new pantry of ingredients. Yeah, it sounds cliche, but like fast and easy never dies. Like it's just what people want. And every single brand, every single site I write for, that's always what they're asking for from us, from the recipe developers.
Yeah, no, I agree. And it's interesting because I was starting to learn to cook and kind of find my rhythm and find my confidence in the kitchen. You find yourself so beholden to that, to that recipe of like, well, it's these ingredients, but I don't have this one. And so now I've got to make a special trip to the store because it called for dill and I need dill. And by the way, I don't even really like dill. So, it's like figuring out you can omit certain ingredients. You can add others. You can change the quantities, respectively speaking. And so, along those lines, do you have guidance or tips for people around how do they start to build that confidence and feel a little bit more empowered to, take some risks and do a little improv and, play around with flavor pairings and making recipes their own, using it more as like a guide, if you will, but not having to feel so beholden to following it to the letter?
Totally. It really is hard. I mean, I was the exact same way for years. Like I was that person that was like, oh, nope, I can't make this. Like, I don't have this one thing or I don't like that one little thing and I just would freeze. And it took a very, very long time. I think honestly, even while I started doing what I'm doing now, I felt always beholden to recipes to figure out like, wait, like you just like loosen the grip and play. And only when you start doing that, do you actually become a good cook, I really believe. But it's hard because, and I, as a recipe writer, it's partially my fault. Like I am part of the problem. I realize that where we write recipes and there is such a fine line between instructing and giving people the confidence to veer. It's an incredibly hard skill when you're writing a recipe because you don't want to be too vague and you can't assume. You can't assume even when it comes to skill. You can't always assume somebody knows what saute means or what a dice means. So you do have to provide instruction, but you can't hold them so tight that they don't walk away now,
Right.
Not learning now what that is or learning what that ingredient is and giving them that confidence to then take that to the next recipe. So it's an incredibly hard skill that I'm still learning as a recipe writer myself. But I think like when you are looking at a recipe, I think just starting to see trends, see similarities. I think looking and seeing, okay, well, this recipe calls, I guess we can go back to the onion. Like this recipe calls for an onion and this recipe calls for a shallot. I'm trying to think of an example. Maybe like a soup. We'll say a soup. And you see that the process is like kind of the same. You're putting it in the pot in the beginning and you're cooking it until it becomes softened. And then you're adding your other ingredients. And you know that it's because it's adding flavor, kind of like that base level of flavor. So when you see that recipe, the other soup recipe that calls for the shallot, you might freeze up and say, oh gosh, I don't have shallots.
Yes.
And shallots are expensive. And like, I'm not running to the store to get those, but I do have this onion. Like, it kind of feels like what they're trying to do here is the same thing. So just try it.
Yes.
And so kind of just keeping your eyes and almost being a detective in that way and being a little fearless. Like the worst case is going to taste a little less delicious. And usually it's not. It's going to taste more like your own. And I also think like when you're eating out, when you're dining out, I think those are always really good opportunities to kind of glean information about substitutions and flavors that might work together or just anything like that. It just kind of not being afraid to make mistakes and try things that work, because I do think home cooks are smarter than they might give themselves credit for. They might freeze up and think, oh, the recipe developer told me I have to, this is what the recipe says and I have to follow it to a T. And that's not true. It's merely suggestions.
Yeah. No, it's a great point and something to keep in mind. In the early years, you were just so fearful, like, gosh, I don't want to mess it up, right? Like you're putting in the time, you're putting in the effort. You want it to turn out well. And especially if you're cooking for other people and goodness knows if you're cooking for kids, because they have no filter and they will be very honest with you, right? As to whether or not they like it or they don't. So you build a bit of a thicker skin when it comes to cooking for kids. But that did happen to me recently. There is a rice dish that I make that has bell pepper and scallion, and you dress it in kind of a vinaigrette with oil and vinegar. And I've always used red wine vinegar because that's what the recipe called for. And a bit of a happy accident, I didn't have red wine vinegar. I only had white wine vinegar. But I thought, all right, well, let's just give it a shot. It tastes the exact same. And so it was, it was good in that, you kind of had to resort to using the thing that you had and then come to realize I could have been using white wine vinegar all along and it really doesn't make a difference.
Right. And then it's a little victory that then you carry on to the next one. It gives you that little dose of confidence, like, okay, that worked. Like, where else can I play with? And it's such a better way of cooking too, because you're using what you have on hand, you're limiting waste, but it takes practice. I mean, it's not something that you just flip a switch and like, oh, I can make all these swaps and substitutions and have that level of confidence. It's something that it's, as a home cook, you're kind of working on always, forever. Like I still am. I'm always playing around and learning, and it doesn't just turn off.
Yeah. Are there simple substitutions, Sheela, that people can start to play around with based on their preference?
Yes, absolutely. I think herbs are a great one to kind of explain and get people like feeling like they can be flexible, because I feel like there's just not fear around herbs, but herbs are kind of annoying sometimes. Yeah. They can add so much to a dish, and I use them heavily. So I'm pro herbs, but they wilt quick. They tend to go wilty quickly in the refrigerator. And often you only need a small amount for a dish. And so you buy that clamshell from the grocery store, and, it's not very cheap either these days. And you use maybe one sprig of the rosemary
for one meal.
One meal, and you throw it in your refrigerator and you forget about it because it's really small. And then by the time you find it, it's like gross. Yeah. It happens to all of us. And so I do think herbs are a great place to start being flexible with. My kind of rule of thumb is like, I break up herbs into categories. There's the woody herbs. Mm-hmm. So that would be your rosemary, your thyme, your like sage would fall in that category. Anything that has sort of like that thicker stem, we're usually pulling the leaves off the stem, if that makes sense. Oregano would also be kind of in that family. And then you have your soft, tender herbs. So that's your parsley, basil, cilantro, tarragon, I think would fall in that category. I don't like tarragon, so dill would fall in that family. And as long as you if a recipe is instructing for one, and you can identify it as like that, if it's a softer woody herb, you can swap it in for another one pretty much.
That's helpful. I've never thought about it like that. Yes, it does.
That's my rule of thumb. Of course, there's like nuances to that. I mean, I think, if a pasta recipe calls for parsley, cilantro, maybe no. But if you do have basil, yeah, of course, that would be great. Yeah. So that is sort of my rule of thumb.
Yes. Yeah. No, I like that. I like that a lot. Can we talk a little bit about, and it's almost a religion now in my household as we meal plan for the week, I give myself Fridays off. I do not cook on Fridays. And so I think often as Americans, we tend to plan for the week, or we think, what can you make double of? What can you freeze? I've never been good at it. I grew up in a household where my mom would go to the grocery store daily. She would figure out what she wanted to make that evening and then go to the store and shop for it. Kind of fallen somewhere in the middle of, I'll plan about 3 meals for the week, but giving myself a little wiggle room in between. And so do you take a similar approach to that, or do you plan for the week?
I find I'm similar to you. I find planning for a whole week like incredibly stressful. Like it's
not easy either.
How do I know what I'm going to want to eat on Thursday? It's Saturday. Like that is a lot for me. That's a lot of pressure. Not only what what do I think I would want to eat? What will my Thursday even look like? Like, how busy will I be? Like, yeah, how much time will I have to commit to making a meal? Like, it's a lot to ask, I think, to plan out an entire week, the weekend prior. Just the term meal planning instills stress in me. It's always been a stressful term. But I do also understand that, many people don't live close to a grocery store. So it makes sense for them to be doing one big shop over the weekend. Or some people are so busy during the week that they don't even have time to run to the store during the week. So I get that everybody's schedule and time and just abilities are different. So everybody kind of needs to do what is best for them. But I think like lowering the expectation of yourself is goal one, no matter what, and taking some of that pressure off. Yes, for me, I would say I also take Fridays off. Well, I don't take them off. We always do pizza on Friday, whether that is we get pizza out or we make it at home, but we never buy for even if we make it at home. Like we always have, flour to make pizza dough or we have pizza dough in the freezer, and I always just kind of like have cheese, and then we use whatever ingredients kind of are by the end of the week are just needing to be used up. Our Friday is always our freebie night, and that takes the pressure off. So when we're shopping on Saturday, Sunday, I just need to get myself, pretty much through the week, but one night is already figured out. And then I generally also keep one night as sort of like a flex night as well, in addition to that sort of standing pizza night. My sister and I, we call it bumper night. I don't even know what that means, but we just termed it on a family vacation once and it stuck. It's the night where we don't really have a plan either. So maybe it's a night we're turning leftovers into a new meal or just reheating those, or it's just we're boiling some pasta, like we're using what we have in the pantry, or we're ordering takeout. So giving yourself just a couple of nights where you can be flexible is really helpful. So then when you're shopping on Saturday or Sunday, to your point, you're really only planning out 2 to 3 meals and taking it from there. But even with those meals that you are planning, giving yourself flexibility. I mean, how many times does we all have that where we have every intention of making that meal on the Tuesday, and then Tuesday happens. And it's that meal is not going to happen.
It is this, honestly, it is the story of my life right now, Sheila. And I think we have to be honest with the stage and the phase of life that we're in. And then I think especially when you have young kids, and now we're starting to get into the stage of they have extracurricular activities after school or kind of bleeding into the evenings. And so still trying to find that time of when are we going to eat dinner together as a family? So a little bit of my mindset around meal planning is more about looking at the schedule and going, what do we realistically have lined up, and then let that be my guiding principle around what do we want to make at home for particular nights during the week. And I agree with you too of leftovers have grown on me. I was not a fan of leftovers growing up.
We'd make one meal, I grew up with my dad being a single dad. He would make one big pot or casserole of something on the weekend, and we were scooping out leftovers every single night. And, it scarred me slightly.
It does.
It was just too much.
It's too much. And now I am that parent going, there's so much food in the fridge. We don't need to make another meal. We're all having leftovers. You can pick and choose whatever it is that you want, but this is what we're having just to clean out the fridge. So it is funny. I have an apron that said, and I still have it and wear it, my favorite thing to make for dinner is reservations. And to this day, it's still true. And so, even in doing this episode, it was not my thought or intention to try to convince people that you need to be making dinners from home 6 or 7 nights a week. Like, that's just not realistic, and none of us operate in
we
that
don't need
way
to shame
anymore.
anybody here.
No. But rather just to say, let's use it as a way to just get in there a little bit more often, and to use it as an opportunity to build your skill set of being confident in the kitchen. And the more you're in there and the more you practice, like anything else, the better you become, the more comfortable you become. I am not there yet, but I still would love to get to the point where I can walk into my pantry and go, this, and this, and I'm going to throw it together to make this meal. But, maybe in the next couple of years, we'll get there.
Yeah. And it takes practice, honestly. I mean, I think kind of just tiny goal setting is a great way to just feel, I think, a little bit more confident in the kitchen. Like maybe you're not expected to make everything from scratch. See, there are store-bought conveniences exist for a reason and should be utilized. But maybe it's, you commit to every weekend I'm going to try to make one thing from scratch that might be able to carry me through the week, that will make my life just a little bit easier, and maybe it's a little less processed because I made it myself. I'm not saying go and like bake your own sourdough. Like you can if you want, but let's start really small.
Let's keep the bar low. Yeah.
Let's keep the bar low. I don't know. One example is granola. Like I think granola is a really fun thing to make that if you buy all the time, like it's so easy to make. It's a great activity for kids because you dump a bunch of stuff in a bowl and you mix it all together, and you can play around with, different ingredients that you have, and you can have it on hand all week to feed you and your family. And it's so much less expensive than the tiny bag of granola. And it's better for you because you know exactly what's in there. You can control the amount of sugar or whatever in the granola. So I think that's a really fun, tiny thing to make that makes you feel like, oh, wow, I cooked, I made this, and it can make you feel a little bit more empowered. I think salad dressing is another thing. I know you and I have talked about salad dressing. I grew up with having a line of bottles in the door of our refrigerator growing up. I never even thought twice that salad dressing could exist outside of
beyond what's in the bottle.
A bottle. It really wasn't until I was older, when I was living on my own, where I realized, oh, actually all salad dressing is just like oil and vinegar or lemon juice. And I have that. So if I just combine them, I think I have salad dressing. And that's exactly what it is. And that's such a fun place to start playing around as well, where okay, like I've combined the oil and vinegar. And so you create that little base, but then, oh, maybe let me throw some, I don't know, garlic powder in there and see what that tastes like, or a spoonful of mustard and let me see what that tastes like. A spoonful of pesto, that would be really tasty. It's another fun place to play around. And to your point of trying to kind of build that confidence for substitutions and swaps, when you're starting with something as small as salad dressing, if you mess up, it's just a tiny little bowl of salad dressing. It's not your entire dinner. And so that also is great. And it stores well in the refrigerator all week. So it's something that you can easily grab. It also then makes eating vegetables easier because the dressing is ready to go, and you just need to drizzle it on some greens and you have a salad, or, drizzle it even on some sauteed or roasted vegetables to make them taste better, and you have vegetables that people want to eat. So I think those tiny little things, if you can commit 5 minutes on a Sunday to maybe make a little jar of salad dressing, then you have something all week that feels home cooked. Even if you're ending up ordering takeout most of the week, you have your own salad dressing with it.
You made it. You did it.
You did it.
I like that, because I do, there's so much coming at us in terms of content and what we read and what we see, and we can get overwhelmed. I can personally, thinking through all the things that we should be doing around food, from where we're shopping for our produce, be it at the farmer's market, or making sure that we're only using organic ingredients, or, making sure that, you're cooking at home 6 or 7 nights a week. And I like this notion of like, just keep it simple. Go back to a basic, pick one thing or two things that you're trying to commit to and execute on, and go from there rather than trying to boil the ocean and take everything on, because you're going to burn out. Like, it's just right. It's unrealistic. And it is
there's so much noise. Everyone's telling you what you're not doing.
Yes.
And it's exhausting. I'm exhausted just like you are. And having little victories makes all of that kind of noise easier to push aside for the moment, at least. Yeah. So I think like aiming for start small, aiming for, the little wins can have a lot of value.
Yeah, I agree. And the salad dressing in particular, if you think about it, it sounds faster and more convenient to just run to the store and grab that bottle of salad dressing. But to your point of, I already have the things at home. It takes 5 minutes to put it together. That actually ends up being the more convenient
Definitely
option.
Takes less time. Unless you live next door to a grocery store, which some people do, I'm sure. Yeah. It definitely takes less time. And it's nice to feel like you did something for yourself and your family.
Yep. Yep. Do you have a resource or place that you go to for inspiration, Sheela, on just kind of coming up with those ideas?
I think it's very subjective. I mean, I think everybody, like what works for me isn't the same for everybody else, because my tastes are, my own. They're my distinct what I like myself. I'm too old fashioned in that I like the real cookbooks. I think they're less noisy, truthfully. I find when I'm, online, I think there's so many recipes now on social media. Like, I think so many people are getting content and recipes from there, which if it works for them, that's great. I find it too noisy. I find it too overwhelming of like, oh, this person's making this thing. That looks really good. And this person's making that. And that looks good too. And oh, there's this over here. And it's just like, at the end of it, I'm like, I don't even know.
I don't know what to do.
I don't know what to do. But there's something so like, I don't know, just real about a book where it's less noisy, there's less coming at me, where I can just pull it off the shelf and flip to a page and okay, that sounds good. And there's nothing kind of, like yelling at me from other angles, like, oh, this would be better, or you should be doing it this way. And I find just starting with the real books that you have on your shelf. We all have cookbooks.
Yes.
And maybe it's less high tech, but that's sort of my favorite place to start, is just reading through the books.
I think this is also actually a really good segue into asking you are working on another cookbook, and it ties in quite well to the topic of today's discussion around home cooked meals. So do you want to tell us a little bit more about what you're working on?
Yeah. So all the things we've been talking about have been very much on my brain, because my next book is really kind of hoping to hit on all of these issues that we as home cooks are having. So I'm working on my third book. It's all about pantry cooking, recipes from the pantry, specifically Italian recipes, because I feel like the Italians really do know how to use what they have on hand. They're resourceful. And it's also my favorite cuisine. It's what I'm most passionate about. So it's been really interesting. And the book, it will be kind of broken up into categories. The chapters will be each a pantry staple that's specific to Italian cuisine in general. So of course there's pasta.
Yes,
There's
there
2
has to be.
chapters, in fact. There's pasta, but there's also a chapter on beans where beans are the focus. There's a chapter on bread because the Italians are really resourceful when it comes to bread. They don't let one bit of a loaf go to waste, and are using it from when it's fresh from the bakery or the store all the way until it's like that really dried out heel at the end.
It's good for croutons.
Meals. Yes, absolutely. So I really am hoping with this book that it gives people the skills and just like the confidence to start with what they have. What has been interesting about this book is we were talking about, one of the flaws of a recipe writer, myself as included, is you write these recipes and you list out the ingredients and that's it. And you don't explain to those who are trying to cook your recipes that there are a million swaps and substitutions like we were talking about. And, here today, we've been talking about trying to build the confidence when you look at a recipe like that and being able to do those kind of swaps and substitutions yourself based on what you have or what might taste good to you. But what I'm really hoping to do in this next book is teach people that each recipe will come with a swaps and substitutions
that's
section
great.
that will really lay it out like, okay, you don't have as simple as, okay, you don't have diced canned tomatoes, but you have a jar of crushed tomatoes. It's okay. You can use it. Like it's sometimes all that I think it takes is someone just saying it's okay.
Yes.
It's fine to do that. And so it's really important to me to give home cooks permission because that's how I cook. But I needed to, it took a long time for me to like kind of find that permission as we were talking about. So that is kind of what I'm working on. It's been a lot of fun and it's made me have to do a lot of thinking outside of the box and just thinking in general about how can I make this recipe as cookable and approachable to people as possible. So more to come, but I'm right in the thick of it, but it's been really fun. And
I'm so excited. I honestly, I can't wait for it to come out. And I know you're going to Italy, right? As a part of this process. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. We're leaving soon, but yeah, I'm hoping to sort of fill in some gaps in the book and get some inspiration. It's one of those books that I really hope gets oil spattered and is used again and again. It's not, I don't want this to be the coffee table book. I want it to be the book that's actually in your kitchen and that you become confident, even if it's only with a recipe or two from the book enough that like you might not actually need to pull out the book eventually, that you can just make it. That's my hope.
No, I have no doubt it will be. And I really am. I'm excited for you and I'm excited for us when it comes out so that we can get our hands on it and start to use it. And I have to say, before we get into this very last segment, speaking of Italy, you opened my eyes to a brioche bun that you toast and then put scoops of gelato in the middle. So oh my gosh. And it makes this beautiful ice cream sandwich. My family went wild for it. It's so fun and so enjoyable and just unexpected. Did you come across that when you were spending time in Italy?
Yeah, it's a classic thing that you'll see. It's from Sicily. And they actually, in the summer months, you'll see it at gelaterias and cafes. And it's actually commonly eaten for breakfast, which is amazing.
Yeah.
I like ice cream for breakfast always. Like, yes, I support it. And yeah, it's so fun. And what I love is that it's all store-bought. And yes, when you put a store-bought brioche buns together with store-bought ice cream, like it just feels like such a wow moment. I think
it's special.
So yeah. So I love it. I feel like that's so fun and also so fun to play with. Like you can use any ice cream. You can I think it's a really fun thing to get kids involved in too, because they can have authority over putting their scoop on the bun and squishing it and maybe adding like I could see adding like chopped like chocolate chips inside.
Oh, can't you?
I can, of course,
or
you
some
can.
sprinkles. I mean, because everything goes with sprinkles.
Yes, always sprinkles. Yes.
It was really, I was like, oh, I have to mention this because it's just effortless and it just feels special and different. And so whether you're trying to kind of wow people that you're having over or just even your own family, that is definitely a keeper. Okay, so Sheela, I have a couple quick rapid fire questions for you to bring us to a close. So say whatever comes to your mind first. All right, first question. And this is probably obvious as a first question, but what's your favorite home cooked meal?
Yeah, I love making risotto. It's one of those things that like vexed me forever. And I was like, oh, I can't, this seems so hard. The recipes are sound so complicated, and I'm just going to order it at restaurants. I'll never make it at home. And then finally I figured it out. I can't tell, I finally found a recipe where it kind of made sense. And I understood like, oh, this is actually really easy. And I love it because like pasta, it can be kind of a catch-all for like whatever you might have. Like you can throw a lot into it or not. And it can kind of take whatever form you wanted to. And there's something very satisfying about standing over a stove for 20 minutes and like stirring. And it's just it's like a moment of meditation for me. So yeah, probably that.
Okay, my last question. If you could have anyone in the world, dead or alive, whether you knew them or not, if you could have anyone make you a meal, who would it be?
Well, it's going to have to lean into my Italophile-ness here. It would probably be the cookbook author, Marcella Hazan. She is, for those who are not familiar, she is kind of like the Julia Childs of Italian food. And her books are some of my favorite that I own. And she really kind of gave way to like the Italian food culture that we have here in the United States. Was a huge part of it. And I don't think she gets as much like credit that everybody knows Julia Childs, and I feel like a lot more people should know about Marcella Hazan. Yeah. She has this, if there's one recipe that you make from her, she has this tomato sauce with butter and onion. And it is the easiest. Like, I feel like it really is very appropriate in this conversation because it's a homemade tomato sauce. So you're not buying a jar of sauce, but literally you dump a can of tomatoes in a pot with a knob of butter and an onion. You don't even have to chop the onion. You just cut it in half and throw it in. I don't even peel the onion. I just throw it in.
Oh, you don't peel it? Well, that's true because you take it out at the end.
You take it out at the end. Yes. You could peel it. It depends on my mood. And you just let it simmer for, 45 minutes or so. And it is the simplest, like most purest tasting tomato sauce. It feels like a warm hug, and it's so wonderful.
It is. It's genius.
So it's truly genius. It's a 3-ingredient genius sauce.
It is one of those things of like, if you know, you know. I mean, yes. And I know it is. If
you know, you know. Then you're part of the club.
You're part of the club, and I'll find a link and include it in the show notes. So those that have not,
it's definitely on the internet. Like it's probably her most famous recipe, given its ease. But I would definitely suggest making it. And if you enjoy it, then I would definitely suggest her cookbook. She has many cookbooks, but kind of her tried and true is the Essentials of Classic Italian Cooking. And it's lovely. It's just it's timeless. So
yeah. Well, I think honestly, I don't think we could have wrapped up any better than ending it with Marcella Hazan's recipe. And Sheela, I can't thank you enough. It has been such a fun conversation with you. And I'm just grateful for your time and for being with us on the first episode.
Thank you so much, Julia. This was so much fun.
Thank you all for listening to the episode today. If you find value in these stories, please share it with someone who would appreciate it too. A big part of why I wanted to start this podcast is to build a community of food lovers and home cooks alike. You taking less than a minute out of your day to share an episode, subscribe to the podcast, or leave a review is the greatest form of validation and means so much because it is helping us to build that community and connection with one another. Remember,
A good story is meant to be shared. Until next time, eat well.